Now, this part we'll talk about the alveoli and the lungs. So the site of gas exchange are the alveoli, and the alveoli are those air sacs. They are hollow. They are continuous with the lumens of the respiratory bronchioles. And there are two different kinds of cells that line the alveoli, and I'll go to the picture to kind of show you the different cells. So this right here is a respiratory bronchiole, and then you could see it here developing into all of these different air sacs. So all of these curves are the alveoli or the air sacs, and a lot of them have pores in between, and that allows for a free passage of air and the ventilation to happen in all of the alveoli. There are two different kinds of cells that line the alveolus. So there is the simple squamous epithelial cells, and those are the type 1 alveolar cells. And then there are the type 2 alveolar cells, and those produce surfactant. Surfactant is important to overcome the surface tension of the alveoli. So the alveoli, just like any other part of the body, has interstitial fluid, which means that there is some water there, and because of the surface tension of that water, the surface tension tries to pull on the walls of the alveolus, and if it's not overcome, it would lead to the collapse of the alveoli. So type 2 cells produce surfactant, which prevents the alveoli from collapsing. And in utero, these type 2 cells obviously do not make surfactant, and they'll start to make surfactant closer to delivery, and that is why premature babies are at a high risk of respiratory failure, because their type 2 cells are not mature enough to produce enough surfactant. So premature babies would have to be given synthetic surfactant in order to overcome that problem. Now, the lungs are surrounded by pleural membranes, which are serous membranes. It has two layers. There is a visceral layer that is covering the lung, and there is a parietal layer, and that layer lines the chest wall from the outside. On the lower surface, it lines the superior surface of the diaphragm. Between the two layers of pleura, there is a space known as the pleural sac, full of serous fluid known as the intrapleural fluid. And there's a change of pressure. There's hydrostatic pressure in that intrapleural fluid, which is important for the movement of the lungs and the movement of the chest wall during normal breathing. Now here you can see the two layers of the pleura, and in order to understand how these layers are made, it's kind of like putting the fist into a balloon full of fluid. When you do so, you're now making two different layers. The layer that is right on top of the lung would be the visceral pleura, while the second layer that is lining the the chest wall from the inside, so the ribs from the inside, would be the parietal pleura. You can also see part of the parietal pleura right on top of the diaphragm. Now the space between the two layers is known as the pleural space, and it's full of serous fluid known as the intrapleural fluid. It's a very, very minute, a very small amount of fluid, but nevertheless, it still has some water in it, so there does have a hydrostatic pressure. And that hydrostatic pressure is known as the intrapleural pressure, and this is the sign for it. So the PIP is a symbol for intrapleural pressure. And it's important for the movement of the lungs and the chest wall during breathing. Now this image comes from an exhibit known as Bodies Revealed, and here these are real bodies that have been donated for this exhibition, and I brought it here for you to see the lungs. These are not normal lungs, they're not healthy, these are lungs that of a smoker. And in our next part we will be talking a little bit more about breathing process.